All right, so I do see it is 10 o'clock and we might have some friends popping in as we continue this morning. I know it is the end of the semester, and I know many of us are finishing grades, myself included, responding to those 1,000 emails that come in the last few days of the semester. So I appreciate your time and space here today. And if I haven't had a chance to welcome you all individually, I'd like to collectively welcome you all. And on behalf of the California Council of Teacher Education and the Fall Conference team, we're thrilled to have you with us today. My name is Kathryn Escalante. I am one of the CCTE board members, in addition to the research chair. So if you submitted research, which you all did, it came to me in some capacity. So lovely to see all your faces. I had the opportunity to watch your presentations, but it's nice to be here with you live, I should say. So this is day 4 of our research presentation and discussions. And we're pleased to have you here to listen, participate, engage, and enjoy the work of your peers. So I would love in the chat, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, adding your name, your institution, your affiliation, if you'd like to add your email or Twitter handle, anything else to allow others to communicate, especially if they hear something powerful of interest today and they'd like to reach out and connect to you, we can have that information in the chat. The chat is not posted on YouTube, so it's just for us as individuals today. So your information will not be out there for all of YouTube to include. I do want to mention that this is being recorded and it will be put up on the CCTE YouTube channel. So depending upon your privacy levels, you're welcome to have your camera on, off, etc. But this will be recorded. And of course, you can share this recording with your peers, colleagues, friends, family, anyone that would like to sit and listen to you chat for an hour and a half. So again, I would like to welcome you all. So our format today is I'm going to provide 5 minutes for each of you to give a brief synopsis of your work. I'll introduce you, I'll introduce the title of your work, and then provide you with 5 minutes to share a brief synopsis of your research. We'll let everyone do that. Each of our teams, our presenters do that for 5 minutes. Without any interruption. And then we'll circle back, and I have a few questions to moderate, a few questions that trying to tie in all of your work, which in some capacities related and in other capacities not. So I really reflected on what questions I wanted to pose to this group. And so when the time comes, interpret the questions as you will, depending upon your individual work. So I'll have those questions that I will pose, and then we'll open it up for just general discussion, dialogue, Q&A between each other, with our guests, etc. So without any further ado, I will go ahead and get started. So our topic today is alternative visions and explorations of teacher education. Our first presenter is Gregory Bronza, and his paper is titled, and he's drinking coffee, so he'll need to set that down.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing, I know. His paper is titled Voices from the Inside, Incarcerated Juveniles, Artistic Representations of the Post-Secondary Academic Experience. And Gregory, I am going to time you for 5 minutes, and I'll just kind of ping you quietly when we're just about at that 5-minute mark.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I am none. I always have to make sure I'm unmuted. I'm still learning Zoom. That I find that half my lectures I'm muted and the students are looking at me blankly. So anyway, yeah, my right around 2017, I noticed with my work with incarcerated juveniles that there was an issue that happened. There was a Senate bill that happened in California, where incarcerated juveniles could graduate from high school with 130 credits. And so the juvenile hall had this influx of graduated students, and so they were actually recirculating them back into high school classes. And so when I came in, I talked to the director and the director of probation, and I talked to the principal at the high school, and I just offered our services. I said, well, what if we gave them college classes? What if we, post-secondary college classes? And the only requirement would be that they would have to have graduated high school and wanted to, join the program. And so they all agreed. They're really supportive, as well as the Chapman administration. They were really supportive as well. And so, that was really the first main hurdle to administration. And then as we began the program, other than developmental skills, like revisiting college writing and college math, things that these skills, that general ed skills that we tend to see with a lot of undergraduates. I've noticed, and I look back in the data, like, for example, like their previous SBAC scores, their previous standardized test scores, and noticed that, they're scoring really low. And so I started we started having conversations about it, because I was wondering, okay, did they not know the material, or did they just not want to take the test? And I found that the latter was really the more, the conclusion that I came up with was that the latter is usually they did what we call, or what I termed, they abacadabra their way out of those standardized tests, ABA, DACA, ABA, DACA, and then they're done in 5 minutes, right? A 2-hour test, they're done in 5 minutes. So they abacadabra their way out of the test. But what I found is that they really knew the material. And so to move forward, we found, my colleague and I also found that they really became, they just didn't like tests, if you will, like multiple choice tests, essay tests. So we had to come up with a way to assess the students in order to prove that they were learning what we were actually teaching them. And we were, doing SOCH 225 classes, class and society. I was doing, race and culture in the school system, and, things, that we thought that they would have general interest in, and we also did other electives as well. Like, we had professor come in and teach the supernatural. So they talked about like chupacabra, Bigfoot, but these are natural offerings that a post-secondary student can take, right? But we still had to, at first we had to look at how can we test them alternatively, right? How can we give them alternative assessments? And so I looked at arts, and my dissertation, part of my methodology was arts-based research. So I thought that would be a natural fit for them. So we started working with them on putting down what they learned, not in essay form per se, but in an artistic form, because they all had the time and they had the energy to represent what they learned through artwork, whether it was poetry. We had a lot of poets, and whether it was short stories, short fiction, autoethnography, short fiction. We had, a lot of people who can draw. I have a couple behind me right here. And we also had, I was able to convince the director of probation to allow me to get some cameras, for like Polaroid cameras. And so we were able to let them take some photography, some pictures as well. And so it really worked out well. And that became the primary source of assessment, the primary source of assessment. But then I was able to transition that into academic essays, right? I was able to say, okay, but that all came through conversation. And so what I found, though, or what we found, was that by doing so, they started to develop their voice, their academic voice. And that was one of the second conclusions that we had is that they were very timid. They're very shy. I mean, here we have these like guys with like tattoos on guys, they're like 18, 19 years old, but like, they're still tatted up from the neck up, right? And hard, if you will, but very timid in the classroom, right? I mean, they did not want to speak. And it came down to that fear, right? That fear of being all their negative experiences in academia, right? And so then we had to kind of just chip away at those negative experiences, and the art-based research really helped out because they were seeing success. So the second phase of that is we brought in Chapman students into the classroom. So almost like the Inside Out program from Temple University. And so then we had a cohort of 10 student inmates, 10 Chapman students, and we started conducting the classes like that. And the learning just shot through the roof at that point, because, they started to recognize that even though they may not think that their ideas were good, they started to develop their voice, and then that transitioned into their artwork, which transitioned into their essays, and came to my conclusions that and now we're moving that program not only at the juvenile level, but we're moving that same program to the federal adult level as well. Nice.
Gregory, thank you. And I want to say that when I watched, yours was actually the first presentation I watched way back when, to make sure all the Go React videos worked. Mm-hmm. And I was so fascinated with your storytelling of your presentation. It really stuck with me. So thank you. I really enjoyed your work. I want to move on now to our next presenters. So we have Kathryn Biacindo, I hope I pronounced it correctly, and Patricia Brock. And the title of their work is Teaching VL, Student-Centered VLEs, or else Here Comes Siri. And I will go ahead and set the timer for 5 minutes.
So Dr. Brock, do you want to go first? She has her, you're muted.
You are muted, Patricia.
Unmute yourself.
Still muted. There. Oh, almost had it. There we go.
Yeah, my phone was ringing. Okay, now good. Okay, Kat, take it. I'll follow up as we did in the presentation.
We co-authored this presentation. We've actually developed a paper from it. We're submitting internationally. The idea behind this is COVID has put us into the VL world probably 25 years ahead of anyone's anticipation. And while we've introduced Zoom and some of the other platforms, they're really not appropriate for a virtual learning medium because it's very different from a live classroom format. I've had experience in transforming live classrooms into virtual for about 10 years now. So when all of us university-wise went to virtual in March, and a major kind of chaos, I told my students, we've got this. It's not a problem. And we transferred seamlessly. And in that presentation are some of the 10 key points of things that were used to transfer that seamlessly. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel for COVID, of course, with the vaccine now, and for VL. Because if you can wean yourself from Zoom and go to a real virtual room and use whiteboards and avoid Zoom fatigue. I came off of a conference in November. A lot of the Stanford tech research has said Zoom is very inefficient. Watching talking heads is very inefficient. So that is in this presentation, but the heart of that presentation is the fact that, yes, it's difficult to change, but we can't do it in little pieces. We have to basically say, whole new environment, whole new way of doing things. And the 10 recommendations in there are things that have worked successfully for my classrooms, people I've recommended it to, and internationally, especially in countries where they have remote settings where the only way they can get students educated is through remote. They've been doing it for years, like South Africa and India. It is working quite well. But talking head is dead, as they say from Stanford. Jeremy Balanson, if you want to look up his information, is a genius on what he's done. And he basically said, if you have Zoom, listen to the voices, minimize your screen, don't look at the heads. But that's a synopsis. And Dr. Brock, you may follow up, please.
Okay, thank you, Kat. Yeah, my co-presenter has a lot more experience with VL than I have. I've written 2 educational tech ed books in my lifetime, and I've been teaching online for maybe 20 years now. But when COVID struck and we had to go into remote plus online at my university, Zoom was new to me. And so as I was learning, I learned that there's so much more to learn. And so I became a constant learner. And sometimes it was frustrating and sometimes not. I think the more we use VL and all the varieties that are out there beyond Zoom, I'm still into Zoom too, but I'm stepping beyond that now. We're doing D2L in the spring at Pace University. So I'm learning all of those insides and outsides of what we call classes now. But I think the more we use it, the more we become familiar with it. And I think our students who are also learning the actual formal formats grow up. Oops, my cat is visiting us, excuse me. Every time I'm on Zoom, he wants to make an appearance. I'll shush him away. But I think our students are more comfortable with VL because they've grown up in a digital world. I haven't, so I'm learning, and I think that's what we all are. And I feel my students in New York City, most of them are Orthodox Jewish ladies, and they don't use a lot of technologies, but they are learning more about social media and technology. So we're learning together, which is a good thing. But I think VL is a way to go in the future, COVID or not. I think our students are adapting as our faculty members in New York, some kicking and screaming. It's not easy, but I think the idea we're all in it together, we're all lifelong learners, and we're all learning from each other. Oh, and my cat is here. Okay. Kat, anything else you'd like me to add?
No, that's fine. And I just really encourage people to look at what we have posted if you still have access to the Go React video. And by the way, thank you CCTE for the Go React, because now I'm recommending that for our student teacher supervision. It's a splendid platform. So with COVID and saving gas and everything else, it is the way to go for supervision for those of you dealing with student teachers. It's a great platform. So thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it.
And I want to thank you as well. We're using Go React now, and through this conference, preparing for the conference, I learned a lot, and also being able to see all your presentations on my own time, which was marvelous. So congratulations to you all and CCTE, and I'm glad I was included. Thank you so much.
Thank you both for sharing that. And yes, I agree. I was in the same boat thinking this is lovely that I can watch a presentation, go do some work that I need to do and come back. And now, as I mentioned, they all are on the YouTube channel. So they're there for everyone to enjoy forever and always. So add those to your CVs and share with your friends and colleagues. And I know Alan is probably taking notes in regards to Go React feedback, because that's fantastic. So thank you for that feedback. I'd now like to move on. Actually, I want to acknowledge our next presenters who are not here. So Donna Block and Michael Block, they were, as Alan mentioned, they are on the road traveling in some capacity. I believe you mentioned, Alan. And the title of their work is Rethinking Career Preparation in Education, What the Future Holds. They have a wonderful presentation. Again, this is on YouTube, so you can listen to that. And I'm sorry that they weren't able to join us today, but their lovely husband-wife conversation is posted on YouTube, and it's a nice dialogue to listen to if you haven't had an opportunity to. I want to move on to our next presenters. And so this is going to be Jeff Scher, and I see Jeff is here, and we have Tatavik. Tatavik is not here, correct?
Right.
Okay. And then Eduardo Lopez is not here either, correct?
Correct.
It's just you, Jeff. Perfect. Okay. So the title of this presentation that Jeff will be talking about today is Interrogating Power and Transforming Education with Critical Media Literacy. So Jeff, I'm going to start my timer and I'll let you know when it's about the 5-minute mark. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you, everybody. So our presentation was looking at what we've been doing in our teacher education program for the last 10 years. We've been teaching a course on critical media literacy, and the goal of our course has really been to do a couple things. First off is to transform our understanding of literacy. It's to move beyond the ideas that, so many of us grew up with, that literacy is just about print and just reading, letters on a page. So kind of, it was nice hearing what Gregory was doing, because that aligns so much with what our goals are. The idea of expanding our understanding that, so if we're talking about literacy, literacy needs to encompass all the different ways we communicate, all the different art forms, social media, popular culture, all these, because that's what our students are doing out in the real world every day. And if we want to prepare them to read and write, we need to be far more open and to recognize the power of these other ways of communicating that we're using all the time. So we want to prepare them to be able to think critically about how the messages are coming, whether they're in video, music, all the different ways they're coming, and also help them have new tools for creating. So when they're writing their essays or when they're demonstrating their understanding, we're giving them opportunities to do this in multiple formats. All sorts of different types of media should be all part of the same equation when we talk about what is literacy, what it means to be literate in society today. So that's one element. The other element is that this is a critical project, and a key part of our work is not just that we use new tools, which is important, but it's a start, but that we use tools critically. And so teaching critical thinking involves really teaching students how to question power, understanding that power and information are always connected, whether we see it or not, but that's just how the human process works of communication, that it's never neutral, it's never objective. And so helping students be involved in that process has been fabulous. And so we've been doing this class for about 10 years now. And what we wanted to do with this research is to find out, well, what impact is this having? What is the value of this class? So we did surveys with our students who are now all out teaching, and asked them, what from this class do you still remember? Do you use? What's happening with your own students? And we had teachers from kindergarten through high school, every subject area from English, language arts to science, math, music, all sorts of different areas, and even a few teaching adult ed. And the results were fabulous. We got back, I think it's about 156 responses, and the students were telling us basically, number one, that their classes were far more engaging, that the students were much more interested in whatever it was they were teaching when they were bringing and using different types of media platforms. And to me, that just kind of makes sense. But it was wonderful to hear this from teachers who are out in the field doing this and applying it in all sorts of different classes. And the second idea is that they found that their students really were becoming more critical. They were asking deeper critical questions. There was much more engagement and interest in questioning and thinking about multiple perspectives, and not just what they were doing in the classroom, but they were seeing it transfer to what they're doing in their own private lives, talking about the social media, talking about all the information they were getting. So those were kind of our two big takeaways from this. And even though some people wrote about some of the challenges in terms of technology, access, time is always a big one, because teachers are so controlled by these kind of set curriculum and scripted curriculums and testing and prepping for the test and all that. But in spite of that, math, science, English, all the teachers that responded to the survey expressed very positive comments about how this has been a positive thing for not just them, but for their students as well. So I think that's about my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. I'm going to move on to our final presentation for today before we move into a few moderated questions and then open it up for Q&A. So our final group is Kevin Zach, Susan Masterson, and Greg Kissock, and the title of their work is Rethinking Teacher Preparation, Exploring a New Perspective. And so I will go ahead and set the timer for 5 minutes, and we look forward to hearing a synopsis of your work as well.
Thank you, Karen. Alan, can you open up the screen share, please? Yesterday, it was fascinating, wonderful conversation yesterday, and three people used PowerPoints, and I found that helpful. I will see if it will be helpful here. Anyway, and Patricia, good to see you again. Patricia was one person who responded to our session at the first time this was done. And we carried on a slight dialogue since then, and I'm equally fascinated by the work, Greg, that you're doing with the prisons. And I mean, there's just so much neat, good stuff going on around at the moment. So I am able to share. I hope I'm going to get the right page when I do this. That's not where I want to be. Or are you seeing a screen that says Rethinking Teacher Preparation?
We are.
Well, you're doing better than I am. Anyway, this is a concept that Kevin, who's at a small liberal arts college in northern Wisconsin, and Sue, who's had a rich experience throughout various roles in education, and I have been kind of working on, and it's taking a kind of global look at teacher education. And fundamentally, the idea is to replace the one-size-fits-all formula where, hey, I want to be a teacher. Well, guess what I do? I collect some courses, I go student teach, I get a good recommendation, I pass some tests, and bingo, I get a license. And part looking back at what I have done over the years, I think that just stopped working for you, did it not? I'm not sure that I was really helping my students by sharing what I knew as opposed to what they needed. And we know that INTAS and California standards all kind of started evolving in the 1990s. And so where we're going with this is that let's have teacher education be personalized, criterion-centered, where we aren't doing a theory-practice dichotomy, but it's absolutely an integrated, all of the pieces, and that it starts with what the candidate brings into the experience. And every one of us has our unique somethings that we end up carrying forward through to becoming teachers. But then we provide the guidance, mentoring, and access to resources that people need. And the candidate is the one who's responsible for demonstrating their abilities. And that comes back part in what the comments about testing and trying to find what people know and so forth. Well, in this case, the candidate puts together the evidence against the criteria to demonstrate they're ready to be a teacher, which as a result, we can take a candidate's understanding of and ability to work with the standards, California standards, their ability to self-assess. They've learned how to do that and to put together professional development plans through which continually evolve, but they've got the basic skills for doing this self-assessment and determination of what else is needed in their professional development based on those criteria, and as they become more expert over time, and in putting it together in a portfolio of evidence. And the more we've worked on this, it seems to have some other potential benefits. Yesterday's conversation had a lot to do about the movement from community colleges to universities for Latino students, other kinds of issues of how do we get a sensitivity about various populations in our society. And one piece of it is knowing that there are individuals out there who don't have access to coming to a university, and Kevin can pick up on that one most certainly. So this is a case where we're effectively taking teacher education to the potential candidates wherever it is they happen to be, and rather than they having to come to us on our schedule with our framework of what is important. So we're adapting to their circumstances. Time becomes far less relevant. People can work at their own pace, complete. Location's irrelevant. We're delivering it to them. And more recently, in talking with another colleague in California, we got talking about the CBEST, CSET, et cetera, kinds of TPA or C8 TPA things that serve as roadblocks for many people in trying to, how do I pass the test when I know stuff? Guess what? We're talking about the prisoners in the trying to demonstrate that they've learned something. And with this portfolio of evidence that, as I put here, is current, not a test that was written 3 years ago that's being given today based on what was understood as important in the past, based on performance, not just what I do on a third-party test that's kind of a side issue to go do in order to come back and prepare myself to teach. It's comprehensive and so forth. And it's available for program assessment. So this is where we're going with it. It's based on our having been doing this, if you will, for Wisconsin licensure and UK licensure with employed teachers currently in 38 countries. So let's do an individualized education program for teachers and make that be the core of our essence of here's a qualified teacher for the communities we're working with. I'll leave that to Kevin and Sue if they would like to comment on that.
As usual, Craig, you did a nice job providing an overview, so I'll be happy to give some color commentary as we enter dialogue.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. As Craig, as you were talking, I thought about this when I was watching your video as well. And I'm not a presenter, but it was something that I wanted that I thought about. You know, in California, one of the things that I've heard the Commission on Teacher Credentialing talk about is imagining that all of our PK through 12 students are on an IEP, and how do we individualize education for them? And I thought of that same thought in regards to teacher candidates. How do we individualize instruction for them in order for them to reach licensure? So I had that same thought in when I was listening and watching your work. All right, so what I would like to do now, I'm making sure I didn't forget anyone. What I would like to do now is move into a few questions that I've already crafted. And then after we have done that, we can certainly open it up to general dialogue. So did I forget someone? Sorry, I heard someone talking. Okay. I'm checking my list, making sure I didn't forget anyone. Okay, so my first question is, you know, you all bring, and then again, the title of this this presentation today was looking at alternative visions and explorations of teacher education. So one of the first questions that I thought, and I took some of these words from your presentation, but here's the question, and I'll put it in the chat as well. What knowledge and power are associated with alternative opportunities? So when we think of these alternative opportunities that you all have presented, whether it's ways to reach licensure or ways to reach students in the prison system or ways to engage virtual learning, what knowledge and power are associated with these opportunities? And I'm opening it up to anyone that would like to share. So feel free to unmute and add that. And I'm going to type it in the chat. So again, what knowledge and power are associated with alternative opportunities?
I'll jump in unless somebody else.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I think alternative opportunities can be very powerful. They can also just be reproductive and not. I mean, I think we need to be careful about just simply making a bad system more fun versus really trying to create transformative education where our students can be thinking more critically and really challenging and becoming empowered to have a voice and to be able to challenge the problems in society, the racism, sexism, you know, the big issues. And so I think alternative education opens up the possibility for students, one, by validating them and who they are, what they have, you know, moving from that deficit frame to an asset frame where we start to incorporate the richness that they do bring with them. Validating them, I think, can be a very powerful tool. And then helping them see structures and systems that are often very hidden, you know, through ideological ways where, you know, racism, patriarchy, white supremacy, these issues often are not taught. And I think where alternative teaching can be engaging students to start questioning and not just learning to analyze, but then learning to push back and to say, what are better ways that we can be? What are alternatives? How can we create different messages that challenge and disrupt the problems in our society to improve society? So, thank you.
And I guess I would piggyback onto that a little bit, at least in terms of the systems analysis. I mean, if you think of students, they don't always understand, or they may see their role as having to fit into the system. And I think those of us exploring alternatives have enough perspective to say, perhaps the system needs to be serving the student. And how can we start making little cracks in the system to enable that to happen more efficiently and effectively? So our knowledge is really having that perspective and that broad view of the system in relation to the student, and our power is knowing how to navigate the system on behalf of students, or teaching them how to navigate the system on behalf of themselves.
Yeah, I think it's that self-actualization that the students will come away with. And I think in the past, some of our students who are more marginalized, I think in this new virtual learning experience mode in Zoom, there's a lot more personal attention. And those I know in New York City, some of my students who have physical handicaps, they can stay home and you know, and be taught. And I like the fact that through this new technology model, that we can touch each and every one of our students individually, easier, I think, than in the classroom itself.
Yeah, I think, you know, you all are totally are aligning with what we were doing inside. I mean, what I found, to answer your question, Karen, is with our students is we were teaching our students, and they had this experience, their entire experience within academia had been this essentialist tunnel vision, you know, do your work and really try not to question, and don't question, otherwise there'll be negative consequences, leading to the school to prison pipeline for us, right? And so what our program kind of did was we taught them that you can question, you know, you can have, you know, question power, as Jeff was saying, and you can, you know, if you do it correctly, if you do it academically, you know, you know, it's kind of saying you can ask these questions about the system. You can ask these questions about the data on the school to prison pipeline and why there are so many people of color being incarcerated, but you have to do it academically. You have to do it correctly with the basis of critical thinking as the underlying factor in it. And once they realize that, then it really opened everything for them, because they became academics at that point. And you can really see the change within our students, right? Now, we had a group of 11 students walking around with books, around the facility. And it's kind of like, that was a big nature. So it wasn't necessarily the change in the classroom, it's also the change outside of the classroom.
I'll just chime in.
And I agree with what's been.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. That we can then reach everyone anytime, any place in virtual. I know in the virtual rooms I set up right now, it's both, I use the word synchronic, asynchronic, because that's the international way they say synchronous and asynchronous. But I give them a synchronic alternative, but they don't have to be there. And the students have repeatedly said, especially those that are from backgrounds that are not really educationally, academically prepared as some other populations may be, they keep saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. This has made this possible for me with my family commitments, with my job commitments. I have people that I call my bingers right now. The course has been open, a couple courses in September. There are people just starting the course now, but they will complete and they will be successful. They're just binging. And I say, that's fine. If you need to do that with your family over the holidays when you have not a lot of commitments, hopefully with COVID, that you'll be able to do that. And for me, because I'm not using Zoom, I'm using a good virtual teaching room with an interactive whiteboard and reactions and everything else. I never went to Zoom. I've never used Zoom except for meetings like this. That my students are willing to come on off hours because the room is available for us all to go there whenever we want. I had Zoom meetings over virtual room meetings over Thanksgiving break. I had them scheduled all through this exam week. I had them scheduled after Christmas because of those bingers. They need that help yet. And if I was on a face-to-face campus, I would not be able to provide that for them. And I open up these Zoom rooms. I keep saying Zoom, sorry. It's a virtual room. I open up this virtual room and they get the invite and they're there. So in terms of meeting needs of our diverse students, virtual is the way to do it. And in a good virtual room, I get participation from everyone all the time. There's no problem with getting participation. There's a way to track it too if you set it up the right way, but you're not watching talking heads, you're watching something else. But it is the ultimate equal opportunity classroom for those of us who haven't tried it yet. All of your learning management systems have conferencing built in that probably surpasses Zoom. I know Dr. Brock is using D2L now and they have a conferencing center. I use Canvas, a lot of you are on Canvas. I use Big Blue Button. There's also Blackboard Collaborate, there's Moodle. There are many things out there that are free. You don't have to pay for them. And they are, once you're in a real virtual room, you'll never go back to a Zoom room again, except for something like this when we're just chatting. So thank you.
Evan, I think you had something to add.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's a good point, is that, listening to all of these great ideas and approaches in different fronts is really highlighting how these are all different tools that can help expand the access. And so the power in that is that teaching becomes available to a lot more candidates that weren't, even considering it in the past. And so it starts to become, in their mind, teaching could be something for me, whereas like a traditional model of education, that's just not something that they're going to be able to do. But what's the impact on traditional higher ed or teacher prep is that these are all innovations that can have huge impact on questioning, like, why are we teaching this way, or why are we preparing teacher candidates this way, when look at these alternatives and they are allowing other students and other audiences that haven't been represented historically in the past to become teachers, and that's what we need. And so I think these are all just wonderful ideas and a great discussion about how in different ways they're leveraging opportunities to change the system and offer alternatives that can make teaching and learning more inclusive.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Jessica.
Well, I just want to say what Kevin was just saying is what I've been thinking about listening to these innovations, and even in response to the question Karen posted, So do you folks have examples of how people who run the traditional programs respond? Like, do you see that people running traditional credentialing programs just sort of stay fixed? I mean, that's to some degree my experience. Like, the more innovations we see, the more people, I don't know if it's a sort of response to change that's like, well, that's fine for you, but we're going to keep doing it this way. Like, are you seeing any change in traditional programs? Or, I don't know, how are colleagues and people who do traditional programs responding to seeing innovation and seeing how it works and expands access in other places?
Yeah, panelists. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I can say that from my experience in New York City and some teaching in New Jersey and teacher prep programs, some people do want to stay in their comfort zones. They don't want to go into this new world. And I think one thing that really does help is Zoom, or as KJ or Kat calls it, virtual. I think we need some support groups to say, yes, we're doing it well. Yes, we have these challenges and this is how I've overcome them. So I think that in teacher preparation, we have to think of those of us who are also prepping our students and how comfortable we feel with technology, and also mentoring each other. And I think conferences like this, I think, really help us get out of that comfort zone that we were in for many years, or maybe just a few years. But I think it's very helpful. So I really like this virtual way of learning. I'd like to be in California right now, but I don't think I could make it to the airport today anyway, but maybe one day in the future. But anyway, thanks.
Good.
I'm finding it curious. Oh,
go ahead, Susan. Go ahead.
I'm just finding it curious as we become more comfortable in a virtual learning environment. About 10 years ago, I was doing D2L. Someone mentioned that they're going to D2L. And I had the teacher ed program was 100% online, except for our supervision of the student teaching experience. And after about 3 semesters, I found my cohort of students, well, ultimately they explicitly expressed a desire to convene at some sort of physical location for a weekend and do a workshop and some mini teaching. And I guess the point is the bonds that form and the opportunities that present themselves in the virtual environment are wonderful, but it just seemed that there was also a need for some high touch moments as a part of the program. And I just wonder how, as we move deeper into VLE, you know, what we're going to see, what the upshot of that will be, just in terms of real-time interactions. So, so we'll have to see. 5 years from now, we may be talking about strategies to physically engage with our students, or for them to physically engage with one another. So I'll be curious to keep an eye on that.
I can't speak to the credentialing program, Jessica, but I can speak to the administration within alternative correctional education in Orange County. And the new leadership has been really open to embracing alternative pedagogies. And that's been really refreshing for the high school inside juvenile hall and those working with you know, recently released students, you know, so we were looking at like, you know, the justice impacted students, you know, secondary students. But anyway, the new leadership within Access is the name of the school district, but the new leadership within Access has been very open to embracing certain pedagogies like the one that I introduced.
I think the fact is that the world is changing and folks are going to have to change. Right now, supervising or university supervisors cannot get into schools in order to supervise their students. Guess what? They're doing it on Zoom, meeting with the mentors, using Go React. Thank you for CCTE for introducing that to me. We, in our international work, working with 2 universities in England, they said, oh, we have to be on site to see the candidates to do the assessment. So that meant putting a person on a plane in London, flying them to Beijing. They'd walk into a school, spend 3 or 4 hours, do all their thingies, and effectively get back on a plane and fly back to London. And it's like, huh? Well, guess what? Last spring, we had 25 or so candidates around the world. And these people went, oh, if we don't do this online, we aren't going to get any money. Son of a gun. All of the assessments were done online. It worked perfectly. And on it goes now that every assessment we're doing for the UK license is done online. And wow. So teacher education, and I was thinking about it the other night. There's something like 238 institutions in California, I believe is the number, that can recommend people for licensure. I don't know that that number has changed significantly in the last several years, but I presume that the population and number of students in California schools has increased dramatically. So are those 238 institutions growing their programs to cover that need? Well, I'm from Minnesota, and the answer would be no. The same number of institutions that were there long ago. Now, that's a problem for the schools, and they aren't getting the teachers they need. And guess what? Traditional teacher education, you may just become irrelevant, as, for example, in England and other examples. Guess what? I can get licensure by just being in a school and teaching without having had any preparation. Where do we go? So back to your concept of power. Thank you. Sadly, 2 members of our family contracted it, but COVID has changed the world, and the world of education is changing, whether people want to recognize it or not.
Thank you. And I see that, oh, Kevin did have unmute. Kat, did you have something else you wanted to add? I see you're on unmute.
Sorry, I'm trying
Yes,
to do school while I'm in the middle of this meeting with my son. So. Yeah, I was just gonna say to Jessica, I'm the director of a traditional higher ed teacher prep program, but I'm at a small private liberal arts school. I worked in a larger, public institution before this. And being a small institution, I look at it as an opportunity, for these alternatives in that, and this is part of our presentation and Sue and Craig and I's conversation about regularly getting calls from principals and administrators saying we need teacher candidates, and we've got candidates that want to come and become teachers, but our traditional program just doesn't make any sense for them. They can't give up their life to come and spend 2.5 years with us on campus. So we need to change, and we need to come up with some other options. And so that's where, some of that is taking it out to the schools and actually maybe setting up some sort of like a teacher trainee program, or where we have the opportunity to go and provide that support. And it also supports our local school districts. Being very rural around here, the distance is a real issue. And so that's something for us, I see it as an opportunity. I don't know if other institutions of higher ed and programs may see it that way. But again, as Craig mentioned, I think things are changing. And I think, unfortunately, as it is with COVID, this has become, everyone's pretty, used to this now as the way we can do things. And I think it opens up a whole host of possibilities that people couldn't necessarily see before. I remember doing this from England and Scotland, teaching my students when I was there about 10 years ago, and like, wow, that's really neat. But, now it's something that is a little bit more mainstream. And so, again, we can reach a lot more people that way.
Kat, did you want to add something? Thank you, Kevin.
Oh, me?
Yes, thank you.
I just agree.
I think it was.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Kat.
As 2 VLE people are together. Just for everyone here to recognize the comments about collaboration, we are now dealing with Gen Z students who spend more time collaborating virtually than they do face-to-face. They are very comfortable with it. They have no problems with it. So as we work forward, the better solution from my tech view is not to try to look for more touchy-feely live connections, but to go 3D. If you give a student a choice between going into a 3D room like Second Life or Learn Bright, or going live, they'll choose 3D. Because then they can sculpt themselves to look what they want to look like. It still looks like them if you've never done that with your avatar, but it's got a little nicer added version. Even if any of us were using Looney right now, that would be fun to do. So we've got to realize where many of educators today are still thinking we need to do face-to-face. These students who we are dealing with have no problem with doing it virtually and would far prefer to do a 3D world than a live world. Thank you.
Pat, did you have something you wanted to add as well?
I was just going to say that I think, you know, all of us who are going through these changes too are models for our students. And I know when I teach my grad students, I teach them, okay, here's what I'm doing with you. How can you adapt it to now use it in your classroom? Because a lot are doing student teaching. So I think there's that natural link, and we have to be role models, whether it's natural to us or not. We learn to be, and we find it does work. And I think that's the exciting part. There's a lot of novelty to it with some students and a lot of frustration with others. But I think this is the way we have to go in the future. I don't think we have much choice. When I started working with student teachers way back when, we actually took them for a week out in the wilds, and they learned about nature and everything, and that bonding, that physicality. They were together as a group running around in the woods and exploring trees and birds and whatever. We can't do that anymore. But we can go on websites and we can say to them, okay, go into your own natural environment. Maybe it's the park, the Pigeon Park on the corner in New York City and Brooklyn, wherever you are. But they can use their own environments to explore and then bring back to the classes what they've learned to share. I think there's a lot of collaboration possible still too with virtual learning. Thank you.
Thank you all. So I did have one more question I wanted to pose, and then and this conversation is so rich. I really appreciate all of the contributions that you are offering. The second question, and this will be my last question, and then I'll really open it up for additional Q&A. The next question I wanted to ask, and I'm thinking of our friends that are not here today, the blocks, because in their presentation, they said that alternative, and again, we are all using alternative in a very different capacity, but alternative has a negative connotation. So I'm wondering, what conceptual understandings do we want our profession to consider or think of when referencing alternative opportunities? Again, you've all used alternative in different capacities, but it still has that term alternative, which, as the blocks mentioned, can have a negative connotation. So my question again is, and I'll put it in the chat, what conceptual understandings do we want our profession to consider when we think of or reference alternative opportunities? And I'll open that up for discussion. And this really goes back to Jessica's question. I think she has parted now, but you know, how are we getting this understanding across to our profession that is very traditional?
I think that if we show them, our colleagues who are kind of tiptoeing into this new world and kind of hesitant, if we can show how it benefits them in their teaching and how their teaching really is effective to reach their students, I think that might be a way to kind of say, look, it's helping you, and in effect, you're helping your students. So that would be one approach I would take with some of my faculty members who are not too happy about Zoom, etc. Thanks.
Good. Any other thoughts around, you know, really changing this framework so that alternative does not have this negative connotation?
At my university, they are already working on doing changes to the RTP process to recognize those who are doing good alternative teaching and not disparage those who aren't going to it right away, but to give it a little less credit. And so as the gentleman talked about earlier, the people that when they got paid to do something online, the assessments, they all went there. Our university is already gearing that way, saying, okay, if you want credit for teaching and you want to do it in a traditional classroom, you'll get this much credit. But if you do it virtually, we'll kind of give you extra credit. So I think that's where we need to head. Hold that incentive out there. Don't disincentivize the people that are doing traditional, but give a greater incentive for those that are willing to transform to virtual.
Thank you.
I could just comment in my work with Wisconsin's state licensing agency, in that the teacher shortage has really forced us to adopt alternative pathways to licensure. So alternative initially was looked at something different from the traditional four-year university program. And now it's really evolved into multiple pathways. And I think the multiple pathways concept is more widely accepted than alternative as we move forward. And interestingly enough, I think that we talked earlier about the IEP for all of our teacher ed candidates, and that's a concept that underlies the program that I'm working with right now. And I think overall, whether it's in teaching practice or program delivery or assessment, I think we're looking at that try another way. If we run into a detour along one route, we have to back up and try another way. And I think that's really going to enrich the opportunities that we'll have for teacher education as we move forward.
Great. Any other comments? Greg, go ahead.
I agree with Susan, and I think that the idea that when I get my students, or when we get, by the time we get them, it's almost that too late model, and we have to reteach them, But I think, if I'm like talking to people on the outside and teachers on the outside and people in our profession on the outside, is really to, have that understanding that, that our students, especially our students of color, are all different learners, and they're different types of learners, just as our teachers will be different types of teachers. And, and bringing that universal, we do have like universal design learning that will, is an individualized instructional model. But that by doing so, and by understanding that our students are learners, different learners, and within a same classroom, maybe we can disrupt that pipeline before we actually get it to the school to prison pipeline prior to it coming to me. And if we can figure out that model and understand that just because a student doesn't do well on a test doesn't necessarily mean he or she or they don't know the material. And we need to understand that part of our job as teachers is to not test them, but to make sure that they learn. And then we can change, maybe their perception of academia, and as a result, kind of disrupt that school to prison pipeline.
Thank you. I so appreciate those thoughts. Any other ideas? And I know COVID has forced all of us to embrace alternative ways of instruction. Hence, what's happening here right now. We've all had to modify the the global economy forced us, the pandemic forced us to embrace alternative, although in different capacities, which many of you were already doing. So thank you for responding to those two questions that I had prompted. I would like to open it up now. If you have questions of your peers, questions about anyone's research, any thoughts, any of our guests today that are not panelists, I would like to just open it up for the next 20 minutes or so for any type of dialogue that we would like to have. So if you have a question you'd like to pose, excuse me, feel free to unmute and ask. You're all being very shy now, huh? No questions.
Well,
Craig and then Joe. Yeah, Craig and then.
I was going to yield my time to the gentleman from Minnesota, my old stomping grounds. Craig, good to see you. Karen, it just occurred to me that maybe alternative's not the right word. You know, we have alternative music is a good thing. And in the past, there was alternative lifestyle. But, you know, maybe it's just the way we phrase that. I know in California, we've come a long way with induction. And it is a choice model now. They do choose how they become a better teacher. But we haven't quite crossed that bridge into the preliminary yet. But we're working on that.
Fair point, Joe. Yeah, perhaps we change. I mean, that academic language, right, in our profession, perhaps, and again, that term that the Brock said, alternative, does have a negative connotation. So perhaps as a community, we can come up with different terminology. Kevin, were you going to pose a question?
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on that, and that, you know, alternative seeming, you know, when I have conversations with people about that as being lesser. And instead of that, I mean, so much of this comes back to framing and the way that we frame it. And I think about listening in our conversation today with all of you is that these are all innovations that are just pushing on our field and helping us to re-examine and think about, are there different ways for us to do this? And again, it's really thinking about our students and their learning and our teacher candidates and their learning and teaching, right? And so if there's new and innovative ways to do that, well, then let's use them. We're creating new tools that hopefully are making our profession more inclusive and providing more access. So again, I think someone mentioned before about helping our colleagues to be able to see the value in that, you know, whatever that might be. And again, so much of learning starts with where the learner's at, right? Our colleagues are learners too. And so helping them understand, how is this of benefit to them, or how does this benefit the students that they're teaching? You know, maybe it is a virtual platform that would be used, or maybe it's, you know, some other tool or some other form of assessment that might be the thing for them to put into place or put into practice.
Thank you, Kevin. And as you were talking, I was thinking that, yes, switching from alternative to innovation, and I'm wondering if these innovative processes that we are incorporating are creating a more socially just profession for us, more socially just pathways for our teacher candidates to enter into the profession.
I think somebody earlier mentioned something about this whole context has given us the opportunity not only for us to use with our students, but for students to use with us. And I think that whole concept of reciprocal learning it comes into play here, because I don't acclimate to the use of technology as swiftly or adeptly as some of my students do, and yet they're willing to teach me. And it's blurring those lines so that we're each coming to the context. I think we have dealt like a value added, that we're all, you know, it's not hierarchical anymore, it's reciprocal. And when that starts happening, it really feels good, because it opens the door for deeper self-assessment, and development of a context where we're learning from one another. I mean, I continue to be a lifelong learner as well. And I think we're then modeling that practice, which in turn they can take into their practices.
Susan, I agree. Fred, would you mind muting? I think you have some background noise, Fred. Thank you. Susan, to your point, yes, that reciprocity. I'm constantly learning from my teacher candidates as well, and being authentic and open to it, right? Acknowledging that I'm gaining as much from you as you are from me, and that reciprocity is really fabulous. I appreciate you highlighting that. Thank you. I think Grace, I know you posed a question in the chat. Did you want to unmute and ask?
Sure. Hi. Great presentation and discussion. This is wonderful. I just had a practical application type of questions. I teach online, but asynchronous class, and I have 30 students in my class. I'm teaching 4 classes this semester. What would be any tips or specific examples? How would you engage students to be more, to interact actively in asynchronous class? Can you give me some tips?
Any panelists with strategies that Grace might be able to engage in? Okay, so Kat suggesting Office 365 collaborate and 3-tab collaborate. I'm not familiar with the 3-tab. This is still an area that I'm learning and growing in as well. So Kat, I don't know if you can elaborate on any of those to support Grace, or if she can research those independently.
Well, a quick overview, 365, most campuses have it available for students for free. And it's got engines built into it to help them design things together with the internet use. For instance, 365 is something called Sway, S-W-A-Y. If you send them there, they can create really nice things together. The PowerPoint Design Studio, they enjoy creating because they don't have to figure out the technology. There are engines built into 365 to give them choices. It doesn't do it for them. It gives them a whole set of 8, 9, 10 choices. And then 3-tab collabs is where you send them out in a group and you put them in their own room, so to speak, whatever learning management system you're using. You create that blog for them, you create that wiki for them, and then you send tabs to them and say, your group has to get together to work on this. Whether it's a game, I go to Purpose Games a lot, of Quizlets, and they have to work on that together and then come back and share later on what they've gained. Right now I have in my developmental class, they're all creating Bitmojis that they share with each other online, and we analyze whether they've included the developmental theory. So it's an asynchronic sharing, but they do share with each other. They especially the ones that are a little behind, my bingers, they want to look at what's been done in my comments to make sure they do the right thing. So even in that case, the ones that are behind, it's just a matter of getting out of the box of the traditional classroom and doing something very, very different. The 3-tab collabs work great. It's, you know, they have goals and purposes and what they need to do, and you set up that little room for them on your LMS, and they go to it whenever they choose to. And in 365, if not everybody enters the collab simultaneously, 365 automatically sends out emails to the other participants. Okay, Laura and Jose were here at 3 o'clock. You need to add this now. So it's like a collaboration. You have a virtual teacher, you have Siri, going and doing things for you to tell your students what to do. You don't have to backtrack for them anymore. And that's a quick overview of those two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I like the idea of, in psychology, the carrot or stick approach, and the stick approach really doesn't work. But the carrot approach, as Kat said, and other people were saying, that if we can encourage our students to use technology and our faculty members, our colleagues to use technology, try them out, you know. I think they learn a lot. I tried working with the CCTE presentation with Kat, Bitmoji in my class. And I gave a little extra credit, so a little carrot there. And when she presented, one of the presenters decided to do her presentation with a Bitmoji. the others were saying, wow, this is so great, blah, 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 blah. So then I allowed her to do a module of teaching others about how she did, why she did, how she uses it in the classroom. And it's just wonderful, you know, that share, that collaboration. And it's at, you know, it's the peer level. It's not me, you know, coming down to them like I know everything, which I don't. So thanks.
Grace, I can just chime in, just more generally speaking, is thinking about the idea of having your students to collaborate and create, make things. So as Kat was saying, there's, you know, tons of different platforms and tools that you can use. A lot of it comes down to what you want to frame and give some parameters in your assignment so that it forces them to contribute a part or a piece and then edit and revise. You know, and that doesn't have to be a PowerPoint. I mean, there's so many really cool, innovative tools now that students can create together and collaborate on. But a lot of it just comes down to you thinking about, well, what do you want them to do and how do you want them to learn using some of these tools?
Good, and I see that, Jeff, did you want to unmute and just mention a few of those, just because once this goes on YouTube, we won't be able to see what's in the chat. So if you want to elaborate on any of those ideas, and welcome back, by the way.
Thank you. Sorry, I had to drop out. There's so many ways that students can be contributing, can be creating, demonstrating their knowledge using, I mean, photography today. Remember when it used to be something we had to expensive and you had to wait for and all that? Now everybody has a camera. It's cheap, it's easy, and they're doing it anyways. So why not make that a way of having them visually represent and demonstrate their understandings? You know, this idea of transmediation, where we use different forms of media to be able to share and express ourselves. So, I mean, photography, memes are fabulous. I mean, a lot of people undersell memes and don't realize just how much critical thought goes into it and what potential they have. They're fabulous. They're a thinking map tool. I mean, this is something that's highly popular and really underused in education. A lot of people just don't recognize just how difficult they are and how much high level thinking goes on in that. So I mean, creating videos, creating songs, creating all these things that now is so easy with cell phones that we have the tools. It's almost ridiculous that more teachers aren't doing this.
Jeff, thank you for sharing the memes. I had last year, I had some candidates incorporate memes into their final presentation, and I was practically on the floor laughing. I mean, the critical thinking, as you mentioned, is really, it's got to be precise. And it's got to just be that zinger. And I know I'm a huge Twitter person, and the memes that, of course, appear on Twitter and other social media platforms, you can send a whole message in that short little meme. So yes, I do think we need to embrace them and encourage our students to create memes based upon the content that they are learning. Great. Anything else that anyone would like to? And again, this is just, we have a few more minutes, and then I'm going to turn it over to Alan in a few minutes to kind of give us a preview of maybe SPAN and anything else if you'd like to continue some of this research. But in the last few minutes that we have together, and any other questions that anyone would like to pose to the group that they feel that they wanted to share or articulate or ask a presenter for more information?
Karen, I have a question for Jeff.
Yeah.
The critical thinking that you're talking about seems to me to be so important these days. How do you deal when you're working with students on that? How do you deal with the question of what's true and what isn't? Because I'm just really disturbed the fact that in the last 15 years, and particularly the last 4 years, that the idea that a politician or anybody else can say anything and it gets reported as more or less as fact because nobody questions it. How do you work with students to get through that and come out with a sense of what's real and what isn't?
That's a great question. I think one of the things we try to do is move beyond the black and white, because we got to get out of this dichotomy that it's true or it's false, even though there are things that are accurate and true and things that aren't. But what we need to understand is that no information is objective, that all information is biased. And so if we can start asking questions about what are the biases, and it's a difficult thing because we don't want to fall into this relativistic thing with that, well, then any idea is correct. It's not, real people are being hurt all the time. But what we need to do is get at the complexity and have our students really understand much more that any information is going to be read by people differently, no matter what. The same thing, the same fact some people are going to look at it and they're going to, read it completely counter to it, how other people are going to read it. So the more we can help our students question and start to understand that, okay, so information is very, flexible, ambiguous, and yet there are facts and statistics that we need to know are more valid and more truthful than other just opinions and repurposing of information. So getting into a critical analysis where we're asking questions about who created the message, how did they create the message, how can different people understand the message, who's benefiting, who's being hurt by this, why did they create it? All those questions, I think, build the capacity, that habits of mind, to be more critical with all information, because it is so much more difficult every day now to know what to believe.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
We do need to be critical consumers.
I think it's an area that we all need to spend a lot of time with. And as you say, it's becoming more the case every day. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So last call for any final thoughts, comments, questions, shout outs to our peers, our colleagues, etc. Going once.
Well, I might make a quick comment about just the mere fact of this hour and a half that we've had together has introduced each of us to people that we would never have met. And I go back to January when there was a CCTE, or one of the organizations hosted a online meeting that had some 300 people about what's going on from the Department of, California education folks. And then the conference that was done online. And in the process, I met a member of, because remember, one of the sessions had breakout groups. Well, I met a person in the CTC department, and we've carried on a bit of conversation since then. So I'm hoping that organizations like this continue using this sort of technology that allows a much wider audience to be involved. And that in itself becomes oh, hey, this is interesting to do. I can meet and learn from people. And you're going back to your change piece. It's, hey, I can talk to my grandkids, even though they're 1,000 miles away. Geez, I can talk to my students. So lots of value to, and just a very quick case. I also attended the UCET meeting, which is the England comparable. There was a session there with folks from Ghana. The folks from Ghana have implemented the concept we're working with nationally and just won an international award for change in teacher education. Well, guess what, folks? Never would have known about that without this tool. And I think there are just some things about having this, and face-to-face is wonderful, but I can't get to California and can't pay the hotel bills. So how can we do both? And so forth. So that's my shout out in a very positive way for the wonderful things you have done, Alan, Karen, and all the rest of your colleagues. And how will that change the organization and how we as professional teacher educators interact with each other?
Greg, thank you for that. What a wonderful way to summarize our time together. I have truly enjoyed sharing this time and space with you all. I loved watching all your presentations, hearing about your research. It's quite fascinating, and now that we've really unleashed these opportunities, these innovations, we can't call them alternative anymore, right? But well, we can, but these innovations, I think carrying them forth into our profession is profound and can have some really profound changes. I would like to turn it over to Alan now for kind of final comments and perhaps a preview of our upcoming conference in case any of you would like to present at that point as well. So Alan.
Thanks. I think, let me echo what Craig just said. I think no question that we've already realized that we're not going to go back to where we were before. And that what's been introduced, maybe because of the virus, maybe just because the time was right for it anyway, that being able to communicate virtually is going to be part of our ongoing operation. And for the time being, it has to be. Our spring conference that Karen's making reference to is our SPAN conference, the Spring Policy Action Network. And again, we welcome proposals for that. The call is already out. What is it, January 15 deadline, Karen, right?
I believe that's correct, yes.
If any of you want to, if you have this research or new research you're doing, jump on board for that conference for sure. And then next fall, we'll have maybe we'll have a face-to-face conference in San Diego. Maybe it'll still be virtual. We really don't know yet. But either way, we want proposals for that as well. And I'm hoping that a lot of the research that's been reported this fall, that many of these projects are ongoing, that you'll have the next stage to report to us. So please keep that in mind always. And I do think we're going to be doing more virtual stuff as time goes forward, in addition to our regular. We'll have face-to-face spring and fall conferences as soon as we can. But in the meantime, and even beyond that, I think this vehicle is proving, these 5 meetings this week, we would never have thought of doing this previously. But suddenly, as we were looking at what came out of the fall conference, how can we keep the message going? How can we explore it more deeply? I think we'll have virtual meetings, right on through as we go forward. So again, let me thank you all for being part of this. We really appreciate it. And we'll hope to hear from you again soon.